Don't get me wrong, nostalgia has served Disney very, very well. But nostalgia ain't what it used to be. Hey there, folks. This is all spawning off of an article that actually is about a month old by the time that you are seeing this. But I only became aware of it about a week and a half ago because I finally saw some videos start to talk about it, and it really got me thinking. So, the article that got my whole brain moving came from Variety, and it was about how Disney is currently in the process of trying very hard to not only appeal to Gen Z males, but also to come up with brand new IPs and projects that will appeal to them. So, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is you'd think that there would be appeal to Gen Z men from the kind of stuff they've already got. Like, doesn't Star Wars and Marvel play well with, younger men? Well, Marvel used to, but it's been in a bit of a slump lately. It's not dead. I have my issues with it, talked about them here. But it's certainly not what it used to be. It's definitely not growing anymore. As for Star Wars, well, Star Wars kind of plays a bit more into what I'm going to be talking about as we go along in terms of its nostalgic value. So there was part of me that saw this article and thought, Disney, why are you trying to target a demographic that you're just not doing particularly well with when you're doing so well with basically everybody else? Can't you let one demographic go? But the thing is, in many ways, it's kind of forward thinking of them, which is surprising for a corporation of that size. They tend to be very short-sighted these days. But it is kind of looking down the road at the fact that what has made Disney massively successful, and understand, Disney has always been successful, but what made them mega successful in the modern era was millennials, nostalgic millennials in particular. The thing is, though, if you are trying to run a long-term business and or continue to grow your business, you can't keep banking on the same audience forever. Now, if you just wanted a stable, sustainable business, sure, you can do that, at least to an extent, and for quite a while. But the thing is, as I brought up more than a few times in general, we are at a point in time of late-stage capitalism where it is not enough to be sustainable and profitable. You have to be growing. And the thing about playing really well with a certain demographic, like, say, millennials, is that demographic's not getting any bigger. There are as many millennials now as there will ever be, and the number's only going to dwindle with time. If you want to keep growing, or at least find a way to make it look like you're still growing, you need to be bringing in new audiences. And the reason they're targeting Gen Z men is because that is an audience they currently don't do especially well with, which means it's got the most growth potential. Are they doing as well with Gen Z women as they are with millennials on the whole? Probably not, but it's probably a smaller gap. The bigger return is going to be to go after and target the demographic that you don't really have all that much at all. Now, that's the angle from which this is a good idea. The risk that you pretty much always run when you are going out of your way to appeal to a demographic you don't currently appeal to is that you might alienate the people who you already have. That is always the risk when something is appealing to a new audience, but that's usually more of a risk on an individual, say, franchise basis. If, say, they were specifically trying to have Marvel or Star Wars or, Disney animated films appeal to Gen Z men, whatever changes they did in order to do that would run the risk of alienating all the people who already like this stuff and have made it mega successful. That's why they're seeking out brand new IPs. Because while I don't want to sound like I have respect for Disney. I don't. They're a massive corporation. Screw them. Screw all of them. Break all of them up. They're all too huge. We have a trend towards monopoly, and all of this stuff is making the entire world worse. But that having been said, when it comes to general IP management, I have noted in the past that, broadly speaking, Disney tends to be smarter about their moves in terms of managing their their IP, their franchises, and their studios than other companies doing the same kind of thing do. They're definitely better about it than Warner Brothers, probably better than Paramount. Now, Skydance, god damn it, man. Stop allowing mergers of these freaking companies. Sorry. Anyways, Disney, trust me, can and does make plenty of mistakes, but if any company is going to be forward thinking about looking ahead and coming up with an actual viable plan as opposed to a scrambled together, we need something to tell the investors at the quarterly report plan, it's usually Disney, if anyone's going to do it at all. So it is interesting to see the angle that they're taking. Now, they have some serious deficits because it's not like there's nothing in the cinemas that has been playing well with Gen Z men. It just hasn't really been Disney's output. Like I said, Marvel used to do well with them, not so much these days. Maybe they'll get that back, but they kind of can't necessarily count on that. But some stuff that has done really well with that demographic has been stuff like the Mario Brothers movie, the Minecraft movie. Stuff that particular demographic is actually nostalgic for, because they're not nostalgic for what Disney owns. But Disney's been banking on nostalgia for a while. And that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to overly dwell on the Gen Z men in specific. But broadly speaking, I think Disney might be waking up to the fact that nostalgia may have gotten them this far, but it's not going to carry them too much farther than where it's gotten them to. Again, if all you wanted was a sustainable business, they got it. But that's not enough. So what do I mean by all this? Well, to put it bluntly, millennials might be the most nostalgic generation ever when it comes to our media diet and our entertainment. There is nostalgia in every generation. Granted, I'm not arguing there isn't, but here's the thing about millennials. I don't think it's unfair, because again, I'm talking about my own generation here. I don't think it's unfair to say that we kind of never grew up, at least as far as our media and entertainment tastes go. Because, well, I think there's two major factors for that. One is the stuff that we loved as kids never actually went away. Most previous generations, there'd be a couple of evergreen IPs or characters or what have you who would stick around and or get reinvented for new generations. You know, your Mickey Mouse, your Looney Tunes, at least for a while before Warner Brothers didn't know how to manage frickin' anything anymore. But for the most part, older generations, the stuff that they loved as kids also kind of faded with time. It became a product of when it came out. You know, they enjoyed it at the time. They get older. That thing's not around anymore anyway, so you latch onto more adult things. For millennials, the stuff that we loved in the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s has never really gone away. In my lifetime, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles never went away. Transformers never went away. My Little Pony never went away. We didn't have to move on from the things that we loved when we were younger because there was still more new versions of it that were coming out. Some of them even directly aimed at us as we were getting older. You then add that to the other factor, which is being an adult as a millennial has sucked a lot. Now, this is not the oppression Olympics. I'm not saying it's necessarily been worse or better for any other generation, but let's just get down to brass tacks on this, okay? Millennials, by and large, first of all, we remember 9/11. We were there for it. And then, for the majority of this generation, we were starting to get our careers going, or we're on the verge of trying to get our careers going, right when the financial system completely collapsed. The system that we were not necessarily looking forward to, but had been promised of careers and, bosses, and you stick with this place for a while, you get a retirement account and you'll be fine, was replaced with a monstrous network of gigs and temp work and short-term careers and places where there was absolutely no stability in the workplace whatsoever. So yeah, not only did the stuff we love as kids never went away, I think that as a generation, we had pretty solid reasons to want to cling to the stuff that was around when we didn't have to deal with all of this nonsense. nuts. So millennial nostalgia is very potent. And millennial nostalgia has absolutely been behind the massive success of stuff like the MCU and Star Wars. But also beyond that, millennial nostalgia is the major driving force behind the success of the live-action Disney remakes. Are kids going to this? Yes, because their parents are taking them. The actual target audience for these things, and I did a whole video on this talking about this issue, but the actual target audience is adults who grew up on these original versions of these movies as kids. That's why the biggest, most successful ones have generally come from the 90s and the early 2000s. So millennium nostalgia is big business, but as I said, it's also a business that can't really grow anymore. Disney has pretty much appealed to it from every angle that they can get at with the IP that they have. They're remaking the movies that we grew up on and loved. They are pumping out new entries in Star Wars, in Marvel, to appeal to the love of superheroes that even if you weren't reading comics, if you were a millennial, you were seeing things like the Batman animated series, the X-Men animated series, and even that sort of first wave of comic book movies that you might have some severe nostalgia for, like the original few Batman movies and some of the weird outliers like Blade. So there was still a lot to tap into there, and the MCU absolutely did that. But again, you can't grow that demographic. You can continue to serve it and get pretty good returns on doing so, but you can't get it any bigger. Why isn't Gen Z nostalgic in the same way that millennials are? Because some of you might be thinking, okay, but aren't millennials taking their kids to see this stuff? You said that yourself. That's part of why the Disney live action remakes have been so successful. Okay, yeah, but our kids aren't Gen Z, they're Gen Alpha, for the most part. My own kid actually is Gen Z because I am an elder millennial. I am on the older side of the millennial spectrum, and my kid is on the younger side of the Gen Z spectrum. But most millennials, I didn't double check the stats on this, but certainly I'm going to tell you anecdotally, most millennials have been having kids a lot later than definitely our parents' generation. Our generation has been having kids in their late 30s, mid to late 30s and beyond. Gen Z, for the most part, are the kids of Gen X. Look, Gen X nostalgia does exist. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, but it is nowhere near the market that millennial nostalgia is. It's not as baked in because, again, their things that they liked, a lot more of them just got finished. Some stuff got revived later on, but it wasn't continually there. And also, Gen X had more stability than millennials prior to 2008. So a higher percentage of them were able to kind of ride that out. A lot of them still got hit. Again, not pretending that they weren't. And look, I'm going to acknowledge right now, generational lines are kind of arbitrary and not helpful in a lot of ways when making generalizations. But here I am still going to use it because I do think it is helpful in talking about the general demographic behavior when it comes to entertainment. What I don't want to deal with is the kind of generalizations that results in nonsense like people my age talking about the Gen Z stare, which, shut up. Just shut up. So while Gen Z has been around for stuff like Star Wars and some of the newer stuff, the thing is the newer Star Wars stuff has been designed to appeal to millennials and older. It hasn't really been designed to appeal to Gen Z. I mean, it didn't have to. It got so much money appealing to us. It didn't need to appeal to the next generation now, but Disney's starting to realize they've got a big, big, big hole in their catalog. And the thing is, like I said, they can't really try and reinvent Star Wars or Pixar or what have you for Gen Z. I mean, they could try, but they'd risk doing more damage than they would get out of that. Gen Z, and apparently, at least according to that article, particularly Gen Z men, their nostalgia is not for any of the kind of things that Disney has and has access to. But even if we set aside the men aspect of that demographic shift, Disney has not been creating much in the way of new things to create new nostalgia later on. And it seems like half the time when they do come up with something that could create future nostalgia from the current fans, they don't know what they have in their hands, fail to capitalize on it, and or cancel it. Millennials, the stuff that we were nostalgic for that Disney had, sure, stuff like Star Wars, most of it, other than the prequels, which I think how old you were when those came out, I'd say the younger half of millennials have a better notion and better memories of that than elder millennials like I do. So that one kind of split things. But like the original Star Wars trilogy is certainly something we grew up on, even though it technically predated us because we were just kind of brought into it. It was hard to avoid because, my mother kind of brought me into Star Wars, as a fan of that. But when it came to things like that, yeah, The Force Awakens, while it may have had casting in terms of some of the people put there with a hope to get a hook into Gen Z, it wasn't designed to appeal to them. It was designed to appeal to millennials. And the stuff that we loved when we were kids, that's what's been making the big money. That is, again, the remakes, especially of the 90s Disney Renaissance films, have made big, big bucks. But that's a well that cannot last forever. And in fact, especially in terms of the remakes, it's a well that's probably already rapidly running dry. I've said that the real test of whether or not the live action remakes are a thing that is going to continue or is going to stop is going to be the Moana remake. Because I'm not saying millennials don't have nostalgia for it, but if we do, we have nostalgia for that one as parents taking our kids to it. And that's not quite the same thing. So I will be very curious and keeping an eye out on that thing to see how it does. Even if it does well, that's still a finite resource. Some of the things that the Variety article brought up was a lack of films like, say, the Pirates of the Caribbean, something that did have a pretty strong impression with younger men. Now, Disney stopped doing those because they didn't know how to recreate their own success with that. There was diminishing returns on the Pirates of the Caribbean films themselves, and they somehow thought that frickin' Lone Ranger was somehow in the same vein. No, nobody wanted that. So they abandoned it because they thought that well was already dry, but they didn't realize that they just kind of misstepped and made bad stuff as opposed to the market wasn't there anymore. It's easy to mistake, the market's gone and the well's dry, when in fact the truth is you just put out worse stuff and put off the market that's there. Sometimes the market is gone and dried up. Other times they're still there. They just don't want what you are serving anymore because it's worse or it's derivative or it's literally the same stuff. Look, for all the complaints I have about Marvel and the Star Wars stuff, they are serving up different flavors of those things at this point. Whether or not you like those different flavors, that's another conversation. But they aren't all exactly the same. There are similarities. Yes, people will still bitch about the MCU as if every movie is exactly the same. They're not. A lot of them have had problems lately, but a lot of them have had different problems if you're actually paying attention. But that is a separate rant. There is kind of an irony of the idea that overplaying to nostalgia and neglecting developing new things or properly, thoroughly reinventing things in a way that means we don't care if we retain the old audience, we want to hit the new audience. Because understand, there are properties out there that do that. The Mario video games are a really good example of that. It kind of became a very trendy thing, especially for millennial audiences, to have a property age with its audience. That's what resulted in things like the Transformers live action movies and the tone that those things had. The idea was to appeal to people who grew up on it as kids, but you're not trying to reinvent it to bring in a new generation of kids. You are sort of revising and aging up the property to appeal to the people who already liked it back when it was new. But something like the Mario franchise in video games has continually reinvented itself for a new generation of kids. And while it certainly does get business from nostalgic adults, it also doesn't seem to really care. It doesn't pander to them. That franchise doesn't worry about retaining its old fans. It worries about reinventing itself to appeal to the new ones. And that's why Mario games have a tendency to lead the way in whatever genre they are working in. That's why they tend to be very much the bench setters for these kinds of things, because they're willing to go new places and try new things rather than to just find ways to be more adult about the exact same stuff they've always done, which is what, say, Sonic the Hedgehog has tried to do to far more inconsistent results. So that's what Disney is lacking, but because they've already kind of committed at this point to continuing to appeal to the millennial nostalgia dollar, they can't really do a full proper reinvention of stuff like Star Wars or the MCU or even really Pixar or their own Disney animated output. They can't fully reinvent that for a younger generation, even if they knew how, which that's questionable in and of itself. But even if they knew how, that's not a good idea. Because as I said towards the start, that risks alienating the people they already have. And if it doesn't work, well, then they're ultra screwed. What they're doing, or what they're trying to do as an approach, what their goal is, makes sense. Are they going to make good decisions in the pursuit of that Gen Z audience, especially that Gen Z man audience? Probably not. I suspect they're going to screw that up because it is going to be a boardroom of 50-plus-year-old men trying to figure out what teens and 20-somethings like. It's probably going to be embarrassing. Actually, it's probably going to be horrific because they're going to be using AI and large language models to help them figure out what the young people are into. And it's going to be bad. But I at least appreciate the situation that they're in and that they are being forward thinking enough to realize, oh, okay, we need to hook this younger generation because they're not nostalgic for what we do. So they're not going to successfully help us grow or eventually replace our millennial audience. And if we're going to think further ahead, anything close to long term, we need to get on that. And they're right about that fact. How they're going to go about it? Probably going to be embarrassing. Might be funny, but we'll see. I just thought it was really interesting to think about the ways in which nostalgia became such a bankable thing for my generation. Like, literally, my generation will rush out and completely buy out the Pokemon trading cards from Happy Meals sold at McDonald's and make sure that no actual child gets a hold of these things because we are that clingy to our nostalgia. That's my freaking generation. That's who we are. We were an easy sell for nostalgia. Gen Z? Well, to circle back to the point that I made about how millennials were nostalgic about when they were younger because being an adult has kind of sucked. Gen Z's life has kind of sucked during the years they're supposed to be nostalgic for. It's really hard to be nostalgic when one of your formative experiences was something like the pandemic. And that's not even getting into everything else that is going wrong. Whereas with millennials, Disney had a generation that was eager to retreat into nostalgia because our adulthood sucked. What's coming up right now with Gen Z? And we'll see what happens with Gen Alpha. Disney might do slightly better with them because since a lot of them have millennial parents, they might have been raised into a lot of these fandoms. But when it comes to Gen Z, as they acquire whatever amount of purchasing power they're ever going to have, with the nightmare of capitalism we currently live in, what do they actually have to be nostalgic for? A lot of it is reheated versions of what we were nostalgic for, and or it was just periods in their lives that sucked. It's hard to sell nostalgia to people who would rather forget their younger years. And that's the issue that Disney is facing, even trying to appeal to Gen Z. We'll see what happens, though. I just found it interesting to think about, and I wanted to share those thoughts with you. Again, they're slightly out of date. The article that got me thinking about this is like a month old, but I don't know. Maybe you still found it interesting. What are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. Those will help as well. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lufula, Monty Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Alyssa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Barabajoggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite, as well as Welsh Wrestling Geeks. So, folks said they wanted the rats back. Here they are. I really should have not worn something that exposed this much skin. Their nails are sharp. Ow. Oh, you guys, get back